Hello, everybody. And here we are. It's Father's Day here in America. I don't know if they celebrate that in Britain, over there where Reverend David is. The Venerable Reverend David William Parry still squeams beneath all of the numerous honorifics that he's achieved. He's so humble. You people don't realize what a great honor it is to have Archbishop Parry here on with us. And that being said, this is What is Truth, episode 84, where we presumptuously attempt to approach the subject of truth ever so slowly, out of just respect for the base concept of coming to some kind of conjunction with reality, whatever that means. And my name is John Barnwell. I'm here in the city of Detroit, the Straits. And I'm with the Reverend David William Parry from merry old England, the city of London. My toe is stuck in my cell phone cord. There. Excuse me. In any event, today I thought it would be good to kind of do a little bit of refresher. Of course, that's all you can ever do in this subject matter we tend to approach is just keep passing over it and taking aerial photographs of whatever cognitive framework we've developed to be able to comprehend where we are, what it is we're doing. And I've more and more, of course, I've known for a long time, but it just grows in the idea of the concept of time and the value of time in consideration of the process of becoming human. And essentially, what does that mean? Rudolf Steiner came up with the name, and it's one that was actually used before, but the context in which he put it brings it to a far more developed point of view. And so consequently, you could say that anthroposophy has to do with the art of becoming fully human. And yes, there's the newsletter from Great Britain with that wonderful picture on it, that artistic approach that's so important to understand is like, okay, so as we approach truth, we realize that it's composed of infinite layers of complexity, really. And what many people try to do when they approach a spiritual path is they try to come into relationship with simplification. And there are aspects of this that you could have a simple relationship with that could serve as a rudder to be able to approach the layers and layers of complexity. But one aspect of this I want to share is in the lecture cycle, the background to the Gospel of St. Mark, and that was 13 lectures given in Berlin, Munich, Hanover, and Koblenz between October 17th of 1910 and June 10th of 1911. It's assembled together from all these various lectures. But in there, he attempts to give you a perspective regarding the subtleties of the Gospels and their relationship to each other. And regarding this, he says, one result of these studies should have been to establish in our souls a growing realization of the greatness of this unique event. meaning the mystery of Golgotha, of course. We have understood that the reason why there are 4 Gospels is that their authors, writing as inspired occultists, each wish to describe the great event from a special angle, just as a photograph of an object is taken from a particular side. By combining the pictures, each taken from a different angle, an idea of the reality can be obtained. Each of the evangelists makes it possible for us to study one aspect in particular of the great event in Palestine. The Gospel of John gives us insight into the great events in Palestine by opening out a vista of the highest human goals, and at the same time of the sublime realities of the spiritual worlds. The Gospel of Luke unveils the mysteries connected with the personality of Jesus of Nazareth, with the Solomon Jesus and the Nathan Jesus, until the moment when the Christ descends onto him. The Gospel of Matthew, as those of you who heard the lectures will know, and others will be able to read, shows how the bodily nature in which Christ was to incarnate for 3 years was prepared by mysterious processes connected with the racial stock of the ancient Hebrew people. In a certain respect, the Gospel of Mark can lead us to supreme heights in our study of Christianity and give us insight into many matters communicated by the other Gospels, but in a less dramatic way. And so this evening, I will take the opportunity of saying something in reference to the Gospel of St. Mark. And so in this compendium of lectures, Rudolf Steiner paints pictures, so to speak. He gives us a context because, as I've said on many occasions, Rudolf Steiner had said that one of his 5 primary works, Occult Science and Outline, or it's been retitled Esoteric Science and Outline, but on whatever name you give it, within there he gives you the relationship of human destiny to time, especially in chapter 4. And he says of that work that it could have been given another name. It would have been the science of the Holy Grail. And so you see that what we're trying to approach here is this Grail science. And that's that multifaceted way of approaching the mystery of Golgotha, using the lenses that have been given to us by the writers of the Gospel and Paul, and that whole panoramic view of the mystery of Golgotha that can be approached by the simplest of souls, and yet, as we've explored previously, some of the most developed individuals, the smartest people, have spent their lives trying to unlock the mysteries of this New Testament event. And so the good news, as they say, the gospel. And so with that being said, let's greet the Reverend David, because it looks like he's taking a nap there.
So I'm having a phone issue, forgive me. Hi there, John. Good to see you on Father's Day. Yes, it's Father's Day here as well. I notice in clergy circles, it's now including clergy. So I'm getting loads of Father's Day messages because I'm also a father in some denominations. Quite disconcerting. Yeah, I'm having an up and down day, if I'm honest. First of all, I need to mention someone you may or may not have heard of, Michael Clarke, who was one of the great thinkers of the neo-pagan movement in Britain, has passed over. That is not a cause for celebration. If you're that type of Christian, you're in my prayers. There's nothing wrong with a bit of free thinking. There's nothing wrong with celebrating the environment and the living forces of fecund nature. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And he will be very, very sorely missed by all the people who knew him. Sometimes in obituaries, you get photographs and you think, I can't ever have met that man. But then the penny drops. So, Michael, I'm sure you're on your way to the angels. And we all need to be reminded about giving respect to the living earth and the living elements around us. We really, really, really do. Also, I've had some very sad news from a friend of mine, Eleanor Bennett, about the Irish impresario John Donne, who is not only a good friend of mine, but a colleague. He was dramaturg in residence, for want of a better description, although that description may have come up, at the Irish Centre over Camden Way. A gifted playwright, a gifted director, a gifted producer, who the barbaric in this nation felt they could employ for 0 hours and 0 finances. Very, very poorly. Not sure how much longer our dear friend has got. So anyone listening to this who'd like to offer some prayers for the well-being, if it's his time, it's his time. I hope not, but if it's his time, it's his time. Please pray for the well-being of Mr. John Donne, because there won't really be a talent like him, much better known in Ireland, and to the shame of the English and the shame of Londoners. Really one of those names at the back of everybody's mind in London theatrical circles. Absolutely terrible indictment of London, not him and his work. So those things are on my mind at the minute. What else? Oh gosh, yes. I'm not afraid of the word occult. I notice even the Anthroposophical Society sometimes, and I've just shown my colours. Let me show them again. I've just shown, that's the new newsletter, so I'm not hiding anything. Be a bit more gutsy. Do we always need to talk about Eskimo needlework, to validate what we're saying? Do we really? Or how many different colours can you paint an egg? Aren't there other ways of telling the world what we're all about? I like the word occult. I mean, as you know, it only means hidden in Latin. The idea of it's more romantic saying it that way. I know some decent scholars going around saying, "Oh, that's the negative. That's the negative. Esoteric is the positive." What's that wonderful old English word? What a poncy attitude. Everybody knows it only means hidden in Latin. So what are you poncing on about? Shut up. The idea that there's a rich, deep knowledge running, threads of which are running through history and running through all of the arguments across human history throughout human time, because you want to talk about time today. I think that's incredibly invigorating. And for me, esoteric sounds just little bit too, if we're going down that route, just a little bit too abstruse and a little too abstract. Oh, darling, it was esoteric. What an esoteric moment we all had. Why do people need to sugarcoat anything? I'm having a go at America now. I blame college kids in America. Get a life and get a grip. Super Mario Brothers is not racist, period. Get a grip. Get a grip. And if you all want to talk about energetic and energized debates, why not talk about real stuff? What worries me perpetually is the fact that fantasy is taking the place of probability, and that rampant ignorant. I tempted fate by saying a few controversial things, and my dear friend John has gone, leaving me to master the entire screen, which, as everybody knows, I absolutely detest. There's safety in numbers. The sooner John Barnwell comes back, the better. I hate all of this because I'm always tempted to lapse into a medley of my favourite music tunes, my favorite musical theatre. I'd really love to do that at some point, beginning with The Sound of Music, but I won't do that. There we are, he's back, thank heavens. Though the gauntlet's down because there are some bloody good shows out there. And I hate Andrew Lloyd Webber. That's because he keeps stealing everybody's material, but that's another issue. Yeah, I mean, I was saying this to my brother curiously, and my wonderful husband the other day. You know, it was when what was it? The Voyager. It was going past Saturn, I think. You know, what a miracle of human achievement. What a staggering thing that the human race had done. But don't comment about that and don't be excited about that. Everybody knows there are secret underground bases on Mars, and everybody knows that the FBI and the CIA and that, my God, they must have powers that they're not telling anybody about. You know, and the US military, they've got every inch of space between here and Mars sewn up. So one of the biggest miracles of human achievement was just ignored. And what worries me even more, I suppose, if I'm being honest, then I'll hand back to you, John, is that there's real occult knowledge in the world. It's there, it's real, it's not all dark. Some of it is burning and radiant with light and leading us into ever greater understandings of the human condition and the process of divination, which is part of our promise as baptized Christians. And that is being obscured by bloody Doctor Strange, Iron Man, and all the rest of it. You know, there are people going around that think there are actual real lightsabers. Get a grip. No, there aren't. There are no lightsabers. You know, like the guy the other day that was sacked from, what was it? No, that's a sword. That's not the same. That's a sword. Yes, swords are real. Lightsabers are not real. On that note, I'll hand you back because I know you're itching to say something.
Yes, the basic challenge, and it's interesting you got into discussing the use of the word occultism, and that's what led people publishing the works of Rudolf Steiner in English to change the title, because they thought that there were negative associations with the word occultism. Now, yes, that's rooted in Latin, and it's important to understand the use of language, and it ties into our theme today and also into some other things that we'll explore later on. But you see that they use Latin when they want to specifically define something, so there's no confusion, because it's a dead language. It doesn't change. And so you use a Latin word to really nail something down with a very specific meaning. And occultism refers to something hidden, like Reverend David said. Whereas science likes to use the Greek language for a lot of the things that they discover, because you could take parts of words and combine them together and create new words and all of that. So it's malleable. And so you have this two realms of language that are playing such a role in the backdrop of modern thinking. And so when you get into that and you try to come to terms with what is the meaning of what people are saying, today it's an era of falsehood. So they want to redefine things, and the name stealers are working overtime, basically. And they take things and they remove the meaning so that you can have no real relationship to it. And that's why coming into an understanding of time, which is basically like Douglas Gabriel, my best buddy from over at American Intelligence Media, that he runs with his wife, the incredibly industrious Tyler Gabriel, that he continually says over and over, they don't have a cosmology. And you say, okay, fine. But what does that mean? Well, the simplest way you can look at it, you can say, well, people are being trained to be space beings where they have no relationship to time. Therefore, it's easy to get people to believe that the ancient Egyptians are just like us. They just didn't have the same information. When in fact, if you get into studying the works of Rudolf Steiner, you'll find that there's a continual metamorphosis of the being, nature, and consciousness of humanity as it moves through time, which is tied into particular cycles that exist within the macrocosm, the greater universe out there, and that we are a microcosmic image of this macrocosm. So in our reflecting of this reality, that we come to an understanding with more depth. And I want to share with you something that is from that background of the Gospel of St. Mark. And I put the link below so you can access the text on the Rudolf Steiner archive, or you can get the audio lecture, or I also put the link in for the complete lecture cycle on YouTube, whereas the other is on Rudolf Steiner audio. And so hopefully you'll support some of these sources. But in the 11th lecture from December 12th, 1910, GA 124, the lecture is entitled Kyrios, the Lord of the Soul. And Rudolf Steiner says, that is a man. But what does occultism take this man to be? In the form in which he stands before us, he is nothing but Maya. Maya means illusion. Approximately as real as a rainbow in the sky. A rainbow is a reality only as long as the necessary conditions of rain and sunshine are present. As soon as the relationship between sunshine and rain changes, the rainbow vanishes. It's exactly the same in the case of a man. He's only a confluence of forces in the macrocosm. We must look for forces in the heavens, in the macrocosm. For the occultists, what we assume on earth to be a man is simply nothingness. The truth is that forces are streaming from above downwards and from below upwards, and they intersect. And just as a particular combination of rain and sun produces a rainbow, so do forces streaming together from above and from below out of the macrocosm create a phenomenon, an illusory image, which we take to be a man. But the man we see before us is really nothing but Maya, or illusion. Where we think we see a man, there are intersecting cosmic forces. You must take this quite seriously. The man, as he stands before us, is merely a shadow of many forces. And so that kind of leads you to certain fundamental ideas when addressing many of the topics that tend to come up here. Like, for example, David over there's, because I remember I had forgotten, but last week I said, yeah, we can get into that next week in regards to the UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs, unidentified flying objects. But that's a really an interesting point to bring up, especially in light of our recent conversations, because you go back to what we were discussing regarding Pentecost, and Rudolf Steiner says that if you want to look for the etheric activity within the sky, you look at the blueness of the sky, and that's the effect of the workings of the etheric, which is the world of life, the world of memory, and that is something that we share with the realm of the plants. And then he says, as to the astral, if you look at the stars in the night sky and you see these points of light, really what that is the astral pouring forth from the activity of beings. And so when you approach it from the material vantage point on Earth here, everybody's thinking that there's all, it's like Star Trek or something, and there's all this multitude of material civilizations like us, but they look different, and it gets kind of skewed because there's something very unique about Earth evolution in that we are physical, but through the activity of the Logos that has given us the I am, has given it to all mankind, but it's in potentia. You have to take up the I am. You have to express it. And through expressing this I am, it brings you into a different relationship to human destiny than somebody who does not. And of course, through various incarnations, people are given opportunities to come into relationship with the things that could lead them to their next stage of development. And by the way, I don't expect anybody to believe me. I just hope that you can understand what I'm saying. Whether or not you agree with it makes little difference to me, really, in the long run, because many people that are averse to these types of ideas, well, in their next incarnation, they could very well be studying it and arguing with me. So we all don't know what we're all working on necessarily, and so we have to give people the freedom to be able to come into a relationship with these things. But in light of that, you talked about the Voyager, and yes, there's a problem with the Voyager. So once it got beyond Saturn, it started transmitting signals in an undecipherable sequence. So what's up with that? And that can be viewed in light of what Rudolf Steiner says: the further you get away from Earth, the further you get away from the nexus of laws that govern our existence here. And so you see that the world as we see it is not really the way it is. Were we to be able to develop ourselves with moral imagination, moral inspiration, and moral intuition, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost of Christian parlance, the occultism, Christian occultism. Yes, I said that because that's what it is. The occult school of St. Paul in Athens, where the head of the school, the first head was the first bishop of Athens, Dionysius the Areopagite. And so that tradition was carried on as oral tradition and eventually written down, and has the celestial hierarchies as one of the texts in which it gives you the names of the angels and a fundamental description. And this was first translated in the court of the son of Charlemagne, Charles the Bald. And so we have this translation coming forth from Scotus Erigena. And Johannes Scotus Erigena, or John the Scot, Erigena means he's from Ireland. So he's an Irish scholar that even Bertrand Russell commented about how he considered him the most brilliant individual of that time. In fact, he wondered how he was able to know so much, because when you go into his book, The Paraphysion, and then having him translating Dionysius and being such a deep scholar in Latin and Greek and all that. But you have to understand that this whole idea of name stealing and suppression of knowledge has been pervasive throughout history. It's a way of controlling the populace, because you could read sources that say, before it happened in Ireland, that even a simple farmer could read Latin and Greek. And so it was a center of learning that people would go to Ireland to study. And so it's a very special tradition in the Celtic Christianity, the Christianity of the cross and the circle. So when you get into all this about UFOs and these unexplained aerial phenomena, shall we say, I've had several experiences myself personally, and but the majority of which I would attribute to the U.S. military, and that they're far beyond our wildest dreams as far as their capabilities within the realm of technology. And I could go into some long stories about all that, but I won't do it right now, because I want to work on the perspective. And that's that whole idea where Rudolf Steiner is talking about that rainbow. And he says, like, for example, the illusory way in which scriptures are approached, like when they refer to John the Baptist as a messenger, the word that they're translating as messenger is angelos. So you see that they're saying that through John the Baptist was working an angel, and that it was bringing certain things to mankind. And you see that also. You can go into Isaiah, and you can go into, various books of the Old Testament, and they make reference to that. And it goes right over the head of your biblical scholars, because almost all the biblical scholars that you'll run across do not have a cosmology. They don't have a grasp of the doctrine of Dionysius, the first school of Athens, the understanding that everything has come forth through the activity of these celestial beings in service of the Trinity. And so, I struggle with I don't like to get into arguments about things like this. I have definite ideas about it, but you have to keep in mind, and I mentioned this before, that craft that have been so-called sequestered, and then you look in the craft, and these are craft that are not the U.S. military craft, but these are other craft, that there's no fittings, that you go inside the ship, and you can't see anywhere that anything's hooked together. And the reason being is that in occultism, in Eastern terminology, you have the concept of what's called Kriya Shakti. And that's the Kriya. It means seal, but it's an approach, a method for bringing something about. And then Shakti has to do with the manifest world. And so to be able to bring about things in the manifest world is the power of Kriya Shakti. And through that, objects can be materialized. And there are beings on other levels of being that are not physical, that if they want to interact with this realm in a certain way, can manifest these types of things through the power of Kriya Shakti. Now I'm sure I can hear people clicking as they check, as they vacate the premises, because they think I'm nuts, and that's okay. And that's why we don't have a huge following, because perhaps there's people that don't get it, and I'm not worried about it. Rudolf Steiner was looking for 4 times 12 people that could really put into practice the indications that he was giving. He didn't expect millions of people to jump on board. And so in light of that, what do you think there, Reverend David?
Well, you've opened up these huge conversations. Excuse me. Oh, gosh. Am I a slave to Martin Heidegger? Anyone that thinks the whole of history is like it was now, but with less technology, knows nothing about history or the human condition. Or, John. Oh, right. It's one of those worrying moments again where I'm tempted to lap into my medley of musical theatre pieces. But I will go on, I suppose, hoping John can hear me. As I was saying before, do you want to say something, John?
No, I was just giving you the floor.
Thank you. As I said last week or at some other point, we are our time. I think Martin Heidegger is a very problematic person in all sorts of ways, but a brilliantly gifted philosopher and a man struggling on the edge of genuine mysticism. Really is a voice for our time, and we've got to embrace a lot of what he's saying if we want to make more sense of our time and maybe human time itself. Well, is that us, the smallest group on the net? Yeah, any minute now. We'll storm the Bastille any minute now. To simply think that it's us back then, 2,000 years ago, is ignorant. It ignores the sources. It shows no historical imagination, and it shows that there's no grasp of time, let alone an understanding of why we are time, why we embody our time, why it's not the same always. I suppose, still want to talk about what's wrong with UFOs. The minute the military admits something's going on, they have to reframe it, but it's too late. If you'd have done that 20 years ago, maybe it would have worked, but it's too late now. Certainly, one of the things that I'm crazy as well. Then, I mean, rather like yourself, I had multiple experiences of the paranormal, and I dare say one or two of the supernatural. There is a difference, which sort of started with me, as I was alluding to last week. With, I mean, anyone that's looking carefully at the wall behind me has that wonderful Agent Mulder from the X-Files poster, with the UFO. I want to believe. I couldn't resist getting that. I'm sorry. Because I've actually seen one. I mean, I was in school as a young whippersnapper, a young cub. The whole playground of kids saw it. And, it was, as I said last week, I think it was only recently the penny dropped that it wasn't just a neutral UFO sighting. I'd actually seen a beam ship, which is devastating because they can't possibly exist. Ski instructors from Venus, everybody looking $1 million, Adamski, Billy Meyer, and all of that can't possibly be true. But I've seen a beam ship. So, what does that mean? What can it possibly mean? Certainly, I agree with your point that intelligence is above and beyond. Right, let me start with another point I agree with. What Voyager started to do is absolutely of supreme importance, which is why NASA needs to be taking it a bit more seriously. Their assumption is that the laws of the universe are uniform across the universe, but that is an assumption. How do we know that the laws of creation operate in the same way the minute, as you said, they get past Saturn? And those are assumptions. They should have been jumping on this material, not saying there's something wrong with Voyager, because that's only an assumption. If we're ever going to learn more about the starry continuum we find ourselves in, and why can't we? We need to start looking at these things in different ways. I suppose when this is the Gnostic in me comes out more than the Catholic, I can't see a strict division between the two. I admit that. Knowledge is a supreme value. We need to treasure it. I disagree, if that's what the Gnostics of the past said, that it's only a type of knowledge of the heart, though I do think that's the principal goal of the Gnostics, especially the Christian Gnostics, that there's a way of understanding the immense ocean of wisdom around the heart, in the heart, that leads us directly to the Christ principle, the Christ child within. I do think that. But, I suspect, at least the Gnostics I've been looking at, they didn't simply mean write off the whole of the rest of knowledge. They were basically saying to themselves, to each other, how do we fit that in to what we're discovering on a metaphysical level? I mean, what on earth can it possibly mean? Which, of course, is exactly what NASA isn't doing. Take again the idea of the beam ship. There are intelligences beyond our world. There are intelligences, I agree with you 100%, that wish to interact with our world. And they seem to be, for reasons best known to themselves at the moment in our history, they can only operate in certain ways when it comes to interacting with us, when it comes to somehow I mean, these are acts of communication. I was looking at some UFO reports a year or so back. These grey boys, I mean, if they're doing a survey, they're doing it a bloody old way. How many years do you need to be doing the same survey? Can we all chip in and send them a couple of Gray's encyclopedias? I mean, the grey boys need to get over it. They must have done it by now. There are the Appalachians, there's the Indian Ocean. I mean, all right, there are people, if that's what they're doing, they're making really a pig's ear of it. But is that what they're doing? I mean, every time I hear of a story recently of alien abduction, which is fascinating me, and don't forget professors of psychiatry like John Mack took that incredibly seriously. They take someone into this other hinterland, this realm between where they are and where we are, and they're laid on a table, and something tantamount to a ritual takes place. This probing and what have you, that's not medical science. That's some sort of ritual. You must know what a human being is if you're there in that form through and through. So what are you doing? You're not doing an examination. Their intelligence is beyond that are trying to react with us. I don't know. You've probably heard of him, John. What am I going to talk about? Richard Hoagland, one of the original conspiracy boys, one of the original, truth seekers. I mean, I sort of, Richard, if you ever hear this, please don't take it the wrong way. I mean, a lot of what you say isn't verifiable. It's fascinating, but it's not that verifiable. But every now and again, you come out with a complete gem, like your lecture on Mars and Aleister Crowley. Back to black magic. I mean, how can you not be led back to the occult when you're talking about UFOs, unidentified aerial phenomena? How can you not be? There are as many experiences of light as there are of darkness. We've got to stop giving darkness the upper hand. Darkness does not have the upper hand. It doesn't have the last say. It seems to try a lot harder than good is at the minute, but it doesn't mean it's more powerful. It's not more powerful. And the dark aspects of all this are incredibly telling, and nobody's listening. The Book of the Law is allegedly given to Crowley by a number of spirits through the entity Awaz. But occultists of those darker paths, the Vamamag, like playing with words in a way that people on the light path do not. So what is that exactly? Awaz, I was. So it's something that belongs to the past. It's an energy, it's an intelligence that belongs to the past. It seems to claim some type of association, or dare I say origin, on the planet Mars itself. And it seems to be leading certain people into going along with the idea that Caucasians, Aryans, whatever word you want, come from Mars. And look at some of the trouble. Hang on. Oswald hit it again. That's exactly the type of trouble that certain negative forces, certain energies are trying to stir. I mean, the Book of the Law itself. So let's take it on a rational level, please, before we take it anywhere else. Not uniformly good, mostly beautiful prose poetry, allegedly from the ancient Egyptian god Horus, allegedly, although that entity seems to speak in a way that Horus would not have spoken in. Horus, at the end of the day, is a being that belongs to the light, not the darkness. And you end up with Richard Hoagland's pinpointing certain areas on Mars that, if you read between the lines, Aleister Crowley did have an interest in and did have a minor obsession with. So what on earth is going on? As I say, I've seen a beam ship, they've all these things, and rather like you, I don't care whether people believe it or not. I find it difficult to believe, let alone anybody else. But nevertheless, it's that it happened. So are we told Venusians? Did Adamski actually get taken there? Did Billy Myers actually film fighting dinosaurs? I don't know is the answer, but I do know it can't be entirely ruled out. And if it is the military, now the caveat to that particular story is this took place when I was a boy, growing up in Fareham in Hampshire, and of course Portsmouth has a very big naval base, so there is a sort of connection there somewhere. But we can't rule out the fact that these energies are as eager to reach out to us for all sorts of reasons as certain people are to reach out to them, not always for the best of reasons. What do you think, John?
Well, yeah, it's difficult to broach this subject because so many people already have, and there's this massive body, this cottage industry of written materials and videos and all of that. And so I respectfully decline addressing point by point, because to me, it's more a matter of perspective. And if you go into the quotation I gave in the very beginning of this podcast regarding the similitude between the phenomenon of a rainbow and the phenomenon of a human being standing before you, and that it's a conditional relationship, a meeting of forces from above and below that converge, and you have to develop your thinking to be able to find somewhere to put that. I wholeheartedly admit. And yet, when you get into Rudolf Steiner referring to the authors of the Gospels as inspired occultists, if you're looking for a deeper view of the matter, it behooves one to suspend disbelief in a healthy way. If you're going to even approach a subject, you have to be capable of encountering ideas that you don't agree with, just as you have to be capable of comprehending ideas that you are inclined to agree with. And so it's that certain level of clarity that's so vitally important to be able to unlock this. And in fact, Rudolf Steiner gets into making reference to that whole challenge within the lecture cycle on the curios, because ultimately, like, getting back to the words that are used in scripture, you'll see the word curios translated as Lord. And Rudolf Steiner says, well, anybody in the ancient world would know that it has a meaning that is not limited to just some kind of a feudal hierarchical relationship, but that it refers to that which is the shall we say, the macrocosmic aspect of an event. There's a way in which the microcosm, the human being, the small individual, is an image of the macrocosm, the universe above us as we know it. And in fact, it's in the Gospel of Mark that this is artistically approached. And you see it on a level of nuance, like, for example, when Jesus Christ goes to perform healings, he does it at sunset. Well, what's up with that? I mean, why sunset? See? And Rudolf Steiner says, well, there are certain ways that you can work with forces at sunset that are different from other times of the day. And so you could think of that and you can go, that's a key that you could actually creatively use. Like, then perhaps it'd be a good idea to, at sunset, say the Lord's Prayer, right? So you could take these and not in any kind of quest for power, but in a humble wish to align oneself with the mission of the curios, the mission of the Lord, the mission of that aspect of our nature that is not addressed in pre-Christian cultures, and that's the I am. That whole concept of the individual significant entity as a gift was received through the agency of the Elohim, the exousiai, spirits of form, as a gift that we can be able to become independent agents of the logos, so to speak, and that it's through what we do and not what our philosophical view might be about what we do, but what we do and the intention. And that's where the heart comes in, because the heart is so much an expression of intention. And so you have that idea that you can become an agent of the divine celestial beings, or, like what Owen Barfield says, not all imagination is good, regardless of what the writers might think, that it is possible to have an evil imagination. And so we're seeing some of that come to expression in our modern age. It's really got to the point to where the beings that have not developed their relationship to the Logos, they're going haywire. I mean, you can't make this up. It's just absolutely every day you see something that is like totally askew. And so is that really what you want? I mean, because it's there for the taking if you want to align yourself with that form of insanity that thinks that the Bible is fake news, like Harari. You know, I'd rather agree with Goethe and Fichte and Novalis and John Stuart Mill and Emanuel Swedenborg and these great lights, Hegel. I mean, they all would work with Scripture and try to penetrate its riddles. And so, well, that's my path, and whatever your path is, good on you. You know, I hope that it gets you where you need to go. But I can assure you that Rudolf Steiner was adamant when he said that mankind won't even begin to understand the events of the New Testament until the end of Earth's evolution.
Yeah, that Harari guy, very, very disturbing. I mean, he wrote that book, excuse me, what was it, Sapiens? And tried to present himself as this knowledgeable humanist. That's certainly not the position he seems to be talking about at the moment. I've got room for humanists, even secular humanists. Viva the human. Let's try and talk about our humanity a lot more. Wanting to wage war on human freedom and the human intellect, as we know it at the moment, doesn't strike me as humanism in any form. So a very worrying individual who got to that position, John.
Dehumanism.
Oh, what a terrible thought. Yeah, who got to that position on a tidal wave of positive energy, which he hasn't lived up to, which he no longer seems to represent, which is very, very funny, very odd. Right, funny in the sense of absolutely depressing. Yeah, I mean, the Buddhists go on a lot about rainbows and their ontology, boomies. I remember doing that at university. Buddhists and the boomies. You know, how real is a rainbow? Actually, the arguments I think get very involved, and one cannot simply say that it's not there, because there is an ontology to a rainbow, even if it's passing, even if it's a couple of seconds. You know, it's there, but it's not there. It's there, but it's not there. But there's no way you can say that it's not there in any. You know, it's not. It's a configuration of forces, a configuration of energies and circumstances that put them there, that make them. But that still has to happen for them to occur. But that's true of a human being. So it's true of the earth. So, you know, we can't just write off processes when we want something to be ethereal. What was it, Richard Dawkins? Unweaving the rainbow. Oh, please, you don't even understand the beauty of the word. And that's not a go at Richard. I think Richard's an honest British scholar. I just happen to think he's got the wrong end of the stick. And I can't see the point of being anything like a professional atheist. You know, I mean, not my line, sadly. I wish I'd come up with that one. But, you know, yeah, no, isn't this, aren't we all trying to look for knowledge, real knowledge, or are we just all defending our particular territory like an armed camp, in which case that's leading nowhere? Scripture must also be understood from the point of view of astrotheology, which is one of the streams of interpretation running all the way through it. And that's from the Old Testament to a glorious consummation in the New Testament. Astrotheology, and dare one say astromagic, whereby higher intelligences are interacted with. Not to accept that is simply being blind to history. Not to like that is a personal choice. But to ignore that fact is simply not paying Scripture the credit and the excellence that it deserves. The minute you're on those territories, you must start talking about celestial intelligences. That goes through all the way through the history of occultism. Francis Barrett the Magus, Oedipus Levi, I mean, even Crowley. I mean, it goes on. Apollonius of Tyre, the celestial intelligences, which Christians sometimes call angels, although that's not the whole of the angelic realm, are working with us and seek collaboration. I mean, I love sort of, chocolate box angels. I love those wonderful creatures, those beings you see in Renaissance art. I think it's all beautiful, but very, very beautiful. And that's not a trivial statement, by the way. How could it be? But if we look at what the Bible is saying about angels, you're looking at something much scarier. They're all eyes, they're all wings and feathers. Some of them have faces like lightning. And the first thing they try and do, these intelligences, when they approach a human being, is try to calm the human being down in case they pass out. So you're not looking at anything, that you walk up to your candy store at the end of the road and there's someone with a couple of wings. No, you're looking at something beyond us that's trying to interact with us for a higher purpose. And the minute that is said, in the realms of astrotheology, in those scriptures that point towards astrotheology and embody that type of teaching, remember it was 3 wise men who followed a star to find the divine child, the Christ child. Therefore, it is there all the way through, and we need to remember that aspect. I think even when we're talking about UFOs, I mean, one of the themes of the conference we're putting on was, that evangelicals love it, as in the days of Noah. So the Nephilim, of course, the Nephilim are not the Watchers, those who fly above. That for me is where UFOs would come into the Bible. I mean, there are most of the visions of angels are just simply not what ufologists are talking about. There are 1 or 2 areas, this is one of them, I think, where you could say, oh, that is what ufologists are talking about. Those who fly above, that found the children of men comely, and they had offspring with them that became the Nephilim. Those aren't trivial or silly thoughts, and they are scriptural, whether people like it or not. Certainly people like Swedenborg thought it was all metaphor, and that's perfectly acceptable. But if we're thinking of the boomies, how metaphorical is a metaphor, and what is the point at which it gains an ontology? What is the point at which it becomes something more tangible and a vehicle for intelligences from elsewhere? What do you think, John?
Well, again, that gets into the vantage point of occultism and the ideas concerning time. An occultist would say, and occultists, by the way, real occultists all agree, because their conceptual basis is based upon that world of truth. And I know that's hard for some people to relate to, and that's okay. But that's why it's universal, just as the idea that Christ came for all mankind, therefore he is universal. So that it's that self and same thing that we're referring to. And so when you get into trying to understand some of the necessary perspectives you have to be able to understand, to approach it, it's sometimes getting into very subtle distinction. For example, you were saying about astral theology, and like our friend Leo Zagami, he's a big fan of that whole thing, because you can look in scripture and go, aha, this is referring to this constellation, this refers to that, and there's the 12 tribes, and even the pre-Islamic Arabs, they had 12-fold tribal civilization, and you get into all these ideas of the mystery of number, which is the second mystery. But you see the shift is that, just like I had said in a previous podcast, that scientists look at somebody who is ill and they see a particular thing there, and they assume that made them ill, Whereas there's another way that it could possibly be that because they're ill, that allows that other thing to be present, and that so that there's these gradations of subtlety that one has to go through. And in terms of astral theology as an approach, Rudolf Steiner's, he's actually uses stronger language than you run into very often. And he says, and this is in that same lecture on Kyrios, so it's right in the context of what we're talking about. I just have to make sure that I can get to the next page. Okay, here we go. Nowadays, many learned ignoramuses try to explain spiritual happenings of this character by bringing heaven down to earth, saying that such things are simply indications of the movement of the sun through the zodiac. These learned gentlemen, who fundamentally know nothing, explain events in humanity by reference to the heavens. In the case of John the Baptist, actually the opposite was true. The zodiacal sign was used to express something that had occurred on earth and was then transferred to the heavens. John the Baptist could therefore rightly say, "I baptize you with water." This was the same as saying to his intimate disciples, as he might well have done, that he'd received the Aquarius initiation. The movement of the sun through the zodiac, as seen with physical eyes, is in the direction from Leo to Virgo. The spiritual movement is from Aquarius to Pisces. Consequently, John the Baptist was able to proclaim something that would work as the force of the sun in Pisces and not in Aquarius. Now, if you're not into astrotheology or all that might not mean a whole lot to you, but the point is that in understanding Rudolf Steiner's comments regarding Pentecost, that when Christ came here, he gave us the gift of time, that had been stolen from us, that we were space beings. We had lost our relationship to time, that there wasn't anything of value other than that you'd be able to figure out how many years ago something happened, but that the idea of the whole metamorphosis of consciousness and being and even our physical nature has undergone a metamorphosis over time. And for example, getting into what you're saying about Nephilim, it's very easy to come to an understanding of that in the light of spiritual science, because Rudolf Steiner indicates that refers to events that took place before mankind descended into physical existence. So that, because Adam, or Adam as they would say in Hebrew, represents the story of Adam and Eve, represents that descent into physicality in the Lemurian period, around the middle of the Lemurian period. And the context was created for the future birth of the ego that was to come into being through the incarnation of Christ. And so, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch to be able to wrap your head around what I just said, right? And I never promised you a rose garden. And this is something that you can't oversimplify. And that's why we're on part 84, and I feel as if we're just beginning to get somewhere. See, so in understanding Rudolf Steiner's work, you have to realize that it's internally consistent from start to finish. And to be able to unlock that internal consistency is the challenge. And that's the wisdom of becoming human. Because as Rudolf Steiner said in Occult Science and Outline, he'd said that people would complain, and I've said this before, they would complain that it's so complicated with the old Saturn, old Sun, old Moon, and future Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan, and all the various sevenfold stages of Earth evolution, the mystery of the 747, 7 times 7 times 7, which refers to the 7 times 7 times 7, or 343 embodiments in a Mahamanvantara, for example. I mean, what did you just say? So you have to take your time with these things, but he had said that this is the Christ language, and that you have to, to develop your relationship to time, you have to have a language in which you can think about your relationship to time. And if you don't have the concepts, if you don't understand that this is the consciousness soul, period, it began around 1413, 1414, and so we're dealing with the most material form of consciousness in a certain regard. And so for those of you that are here, you can take heart of the notion that just the very fact is that you're even curious about these things puts you in advance of most of mankind, because most of mankind is locked into this space consciousness realm. They no longer are able to manifest an understanding of what it means in terms of time, and that there's this unfoldment that takes place, especially since the incarnation of Christ, where Christ redeemed the physical nature, physical etheric nature for all mankind, and at the mystery of Pentecost, for those who strive towards manifesting the I am, the Christ, even if they don't know the words, they could be doing it just out of the purity of their intent, that that's a particular destiny that brought about the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles. And so that Holy Spirit we can think of in the Eastern parlance as the principle of manas. But yet there's a subtle distinction, because, see, the Christ stream is unique in that you can't understand the complexity of the Christ stream by just studying the Eastern teachings, because it's not there. They're expressing pre-Christian teachings and the great outpouring of teachings that came out of, the teachers of the Tantra teachers of Kashmir, like Gaudapada and Anibharava Gupta, or the Advaita Vedanta, all these august teachings that Rudolf Steiner makes reference to, but he says that the yogic philosophy is the philosophy of the unredeemed Lucifer. So Lucifer has no regard for your individual I am, see? And I don't know about you, but when I go to the threshold at the end of this earthly life, I don't want to find Lucifer, I want to find Christ.
Well, I'm bound to agree with that. I think, the reference point for me always, the reference point of reference points is always Hegel. I think his system enables me personally to include all these different types of information and see them from a generally Christian perspective. That is no mean feat. And, there are one or two philosophers that constantly drag me back to them, but I suppose he's the one that's always there underneath everything else, if I'm really honest. I'm saying that because people don't, if they want to learn a different language, it's always an ambition, and they think there are reasons to do that. This is another language. This is the celestial language, the language of angels, the language of the birds. Why would that be something people can't also address on that rational level? Either you want to learn it or you don't. If you do want to learn it as you would learn a language. The fact it has more content to it is neither here nor there. Learn it as you would learn a language. The language of the initiates. And I think that is incredibly important that we all keep that in mind. Yeah, I mean, this show may not have the numbers we'd all want, but do we want those numbers despite everything? And I mean, I'm sort of trying to develop a bit of a presence on TikTok at the minute because we have to sell tickets for the conference. Some of the things I've seen on TikTok are absolutely unbelievable, including some guy that just stares at the camera and the numbers of followers rocket up. Sorry, what are you doing again? We is that really the sort of world we want? And if people do, great. That's not the sort of world I want. It's not the sort of world I want to interact with. But if that's what floats their boat, great. But that's limiting the human condition to the inane and the unadventurous, whether they realise that or not. This program's a little school. It's a little school for people interested in the divine language and learning how to manipulate the divine language between our little family, between the family of this podcast. I think that's an incredibly important thing, and we shouldn't be shy. I mean, what academia? Academia's gone. The Greek search for truth has left the academy. Now you have a doctrine with a high priesthood. Of course, whether the sociologists like it or not, the high priesthood is actually the astronomers, not the social sciences, who are trying to tell us all that they practically solved the riddle of the cosmos. Oh, please. We're all desperate for cash, but don't go into open lying. It's beneath you. It's beneath you, people. And then you get the average local vicar who's the sort of college anthropologist, the university sociologist, trying to put everything in place. But it's to the detriment of the academy that this stuff has left. What's left in the academy? What's still preserved? There's very little worth discussing. This is living knowledge. This is knowledge not only of being human, but more than human. What comes next? What's above us? Where we're being led to? People too easily forget these days that everything is given to us as a gift. I remember when I first read Schleiermacher, Friedrich Schleiermacher, and there is no romantic movement without Schleiermacher. What was it? Speeches on Religion to Its Cultured Despisers, his first book. A little pastor in Germany who suddenly says, listen, bitches. That's the modern word, isn't it? Everything is given to you. The air, the food that you eat, the liquids that you drink, the ground that you stand on. You have created and structured nothing that hasn't already been given to you free of charge as a gift. Excuse me, Schleiermacher, for paraphrasing, but it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. And it's a wake-up call to people who think they're on top of the existential condition. The minute that is admitted, we've got to then start looking not only at psychology, and there is a psychology to all the religions. Shame on every church that has thrown that away. Shame on them, because that is part of the enterprise of the apostles to make people go within. I had a row with a UFO guy a couple of months ago. I can't remember what platform it was on, where he was saying, you religious types, when all these flying saucers land, what have you got to put up against it? And I said, I don't think you understand religion at all. Religion is going within. It's looking at the life within, the life of soul, the life of spirit. And then, of course, he went quiet because they're two different trajectories about being human. They're two different ways of being human. Both are important, I would say. But religion is not simply about history. Religion is about many, many other things, including what you could call a divine psychology. Not a mad psychology, not altered states of consciousness, but higher. There is a difference. Higher states of consciousness, more integrative, more rational, super rational, and actually more to do with the ontology of what it is to be human. Once that is admitted, you notice there's a progression here, I would say. Then all these strange things that happen in human life, they happen to everybody. You've got to be some real, some hard case in a cave not to have unusual and bizarre and sometimes paranormal and sometimes beyond experiences. You have to be a very strange human being not to have had something. That's when you need the language of the angels to start making sense of it all. It's not just weird, it's not just quirky, it's not just something you can write off. It's a language we're learning to unite the inner with the outer and take us into the Christ promise. That's for me what this show is about. I know what it's about for you, John. I mean, we're on the same hymn sheet, pun intended, and that is not a bad way to spend a couple of hours on a Sunday afternoon. What do you think?
Yes, open your hymnals to hymn 99. As we're here, but I don't want to forget to thank that this podcast has been made possible by the generous support of Tyla and Vadim and Vivian, and also Neil, Christian, Mark, Ma, Druvma, Laura, Paula, Rick, Michael, Beth, Ishtar, and many others over the years. And I want to thank you for supporting our humble efforts here. And but I'd like to share with you again something. I got my copy finally on the philosophy of education towards an anthroposophical view by David's resident author and editor Daniele-Hadi Irandoost, in which he does quite a remarkable assessment of Waldorf education, coming from a trajectory of thought that was entirely unexpected for me, but he was able to contextualize it within the history of education. And I think that that's really part of his mission, is to be able to bring it to people with a clarity of purpose who perhaps might not have the background that Rudolf Steiner offers to be able to assess it. I mean, I've been finding that kind of a phenomena in my recent overview of the Inklings, because more often than not, you have them talking about three Inklings and they leave out Owen Barfield. And they just mention his name in passing and that he's into Rudolf Steiner, and then they move on because they have no idea really what that means. Because, and it's interesting because an apocryphal story that I got through, I know people that have known Owen Barfield personally, and but that C.S. Lewis, he basically communicated to Barfield that because he would be reading, Barfield would be translating Rudolf Steiner's lectures and writing things in that direction and trying to expose Lewis and the other members of the Inklings to the value of Rudolf Steiner's work, because Barfield himself had stumbled on the concept of the evolution of consciousness before he ever came across Rudolf Steiner's work. And so that's what really sparked something in Owen Barfield. And you got, mind you, this is an extremely educated group. I mean, these are people, they all read Latin, they all know Greek, and in fact, they could tell jokes in Latin or Greek, so you got a profound understanding of language, and language is something we make reference to on many occasions. And you have, like Tolkien he was the master of Anglo-Saxon language for Oxford University. And so you have all these Oxford dons. But when modern day scholars try to address it, they generally leave out Owen Barfield because they really don't know what to do with Rudolf Steiner. And the intimation is that Lewis had said to Barfield, he saw what it was, and he wasn't prepared he'd have to dedicate his life to it. It was too late for him to be able to do that he had already set his course in the way in which he was approaching the mystery of Jesus Christ. And so, you have to respect that the honesty of that, because it's such a large body of work, and because it involves the mystery of time, you can't just fall back on definitions, because the meaning of a particular name of something goes through changes throughout time, because its context within the evolution of Earth and mankind changes. And so it has to do with unlocking the secrets of that time-space continuum relationship. And so, by the way, Daniela's book is available on Amazon. You can get a free PDF. I put links for both below. And Reverend David here is the author of 3 books, The Grammar of Witchcraft. It's not a grimoire, so it's not going to help you do magic spells, but it is very magical in its context, shall we say. And his second book is his Caliban's Redemption. That's Shakespearean-esque poetry. And his major work, that's edited by Daniele Irandoost, previously mentioned, is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. It's just masterfully written, and that's available on Amazon along with Daniele Irandoost's book. And for myself, I have 2 books. I have The Arcana of the Grail Angel, my first book, which is the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, as a forward by my best friend Douglas Gabriel of American Intelligence Media, and many, many diagrams based upon the diagrams that were handwritten by Aaron Pfeiffer, and I added a great many more. And then I come out with my second book, which is Arcana of Light on the Path. It's more of a meditative tool with a foreword by the noted astronomer and psychologist, the late William Bento, a good friend. And but in here, I have included the complete series of Grail diagrams, as I call them, that give you a way in which to be able to learn this language of Christian occultism that is from the work of Rudolf Steiner and others. And so I added a great many more. So there's more diagrams in this second book. But these are available on eBay for me personally here in the continental U.S. If you're outside the U.S., you can contact me directly on private message on Facebook, or there's a link below for my academia page, and you can download a free PDF of that foreword by William Bento, where he's describing my first book in the foreword to my second book. So also, if you're interested in buying us a cup of coffee to assuage our thirst, then you can go to paypal.me/dparry777 for Reverend David, and for myself, that's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And don't forget to click like and subscribe and all those things. And I think I covered all the bases in that realm of promotional thing that's kind of foreign for me, but in any regard. So I get so into that. Where were we?
You caught me that time. Oh gosh, yeah, Daniele has done a remarkable job in that book. As I say, there's already talk about a head-on what does Waldorf education mean project, but I'll leave that up to him. I think I'd like to revisit 2 things. Firstly, for anyone who's interested, my first 2 collections of poetry are actually going to the stage. They're being staged. They've been adapted to be a staged play in this year's Camden Fringe Festival. That's the second largest theatre festival, the second to Edinburgh. It should be quite revolutionary. I don't know what Victor Sobchak's got in mind yet, but it should be very interesting. A chance to come and talk and meet and explore matters esoteric. The conference is also underway, our 3rd Nephilim Anthropology Conference, where I want to openly make this year much more an introduction to the angelic language. We've got authorities from across the board. We've got right-wing evangelicals all the way down to occultists. Do I mean all the way down? All the way to occultists, all the way to a couple of skeptics, and including the nuts and bolts side of it all, a couple of anthropologists. So every opinion is trying to reflect on what could these stories? What could these histories, thank you, what could these histories mean? I'm hoping we can get more overtly Steinerian concepts in that. I mean, I'm only the I started the ball rolling and I'm sort of producer, but it's much easier said than done not to rain on other people's parades. So some people are coming from America. Jim Wilhelmsen, the Reverend Wilhelmsen, is actually coming from Michigan. So to speak to us. So I'm not trying to blank them at the expense of what we want to say. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but I'm hoping, because I give a memorial lecture each year, each time we meet, that I can somehow get the language of the angels into that. Which leads me back to something you were saying a minute ago, which I think is of supreme importance. I mean, there are 3 or 4 creation stories in the Old Testament. You have to really start grappling with the Greek and the Hebrew for them to stand out. But even modern theologists are beginning to say, well, no, actually, there aren't contradictions. They're different creation stories. And I don't believe they're just thrown in to the Bible willy-nilly. I think they're addressing different issues. Certainly the primary creation story we find in Genesis 1 and 2. That's the descent of spirit into matter. That's matter receiving these glories from above. And, we've got to think of Adam and Eve, Adam, all men, Eve, the mother of all things. We've got to think more in those terms. The fact they needed to be clothed to hide their nakedness. I think there are libraries behind those lines. And if there aren't already, which I'm sure there are, there need to be others. It's spirit descending into the world as we know it and beginning to grapple with the mystery of time, which of course is only given to us by our good Lord in real terms. The minute that view, the occult view, the anthroposophical view is taken on board, then we get much richer readings of scripture, and including the Nephilim, including those who fly above. As I say, I've never ruled out the nuts and bolts of some of these stories. I think there are all sorts of space grotesqueries that are trying their absolute damnedest, and that's the word that's the most appropriate, to interfere with human history for their own vile purposes. That might be a little Manichaean for most people's tastes. All I'll say is look at some of the UFO accounts. They're actually really threatening. I mean, certainly Jacques Vallée, I can't remember the names of those boys. Lecomte in Close Encounters of the Third Kind was actually based on one of the scholars that worked in NASA, Jacques Vallée, who was a French guy, who was asked by NASA to investigate these occurrences. What are all these UFOs? What does it mean? And as far as I recall, I haven't looked at this material for years. As far as I recall, the book, he wrote 2 books. The book that springs to mind is called Agents of Deception, where he actually says there's nothing happening at the moment that wasn't being reported in the witch trials in medieval Europe. And we can all argue about the rights and wrongs of the witch trials. I mean, mostly they were in the wrong. Mostly they were ways to control and frighten people. But the type of phenomena that they describe, Vallée was absolutely certain are exactly the same types of phenomena that are accompanying the reports of UFOs. I mean, let's get to the bottom line. If you're a superior race of beings, if one of these phenomena is related to a superior race of beings that come here and wish us no harm and just wish we grow up a bit, why didn't you give us all the cure to cancer? Why do you have to do these bizarre interactions with us? No military vehicle on this earth could touch you. So why are you hiding, and why are you in the shadows? Why are you half lying? And let's be blunt, why do you always want to talk about religion? Why do you always want to talk about Christianity? And why do you always want to say Christianity is wrong? That doesn't strike me as the neutral topic of visitors from other worlds like our own. That strikes me as something much more Machiavellian and truly dark. Handing back to you, John.
Well, in relationship to that, Rudolf Steiner said that were you a being dwelling on another planet in some other galaxy, the events of the mystery of Golgotha, you would been able to see the change, the transformation in the earth that resulted from the entry of Christ directly into earth evolution, where he's taken up as the Lord of Karma, the new Lord of Karma. And Rudolf Steiner indicates that he left his Atman, his that particular principle in the region of the sun, and now he could be found in the Buddhic realm of the etheric, that realm of the logos, the living realm that surrounds the whole earth, and that understanding the blueness of space through the ability to reawaken the astral nature without its negative possibilities will enable us to participate more fully in the unfoldment of that understanding, and that he is with here now. And when you're having a meal, say grace, because it's a part of his body that you're nourishing yourself on. As you take a breath, it's a gift. Spiritus means breath, so it's the spirit entered into him, the breath entered into him. And so there's an occult side to language, that it's encoded with things that can enable us to come to an understanding. But the critical missing element in the language structures of many people, like these atheistic scientists you talk about. I remember, I think it was Christopher Hitchens, but don't quote me on this, but he'd said that he thought that the Philosophy of Freedom was one of the greatest books of philosophy of the 20th century, but what's all that other stuff? Meaning it kind of gets them off guard. Because they don't think in this Christ language, this Grail language, they stumble on the concepts of the unfoldment of a mystery in the context of time, and which would bring in the whole astronomical macrocosmic image of the cosmos in the riddle of the human being. And so that's such an important consideration, and it takes time to be able to develop that language, and they find it far more expedient to dismiss the whole subject. So consequently, and if you look in scholarly works, unless they're specifically associated to anthroposophy, spiritual science, and Rudolf Steiner, they don't even mention him. It's the orthodox conspiracy of silence. Why? Because he speaks the language of time. And so in context with that, when I try to develop my own relationship to this, again, my personal meditations are the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John and the Lord's Prayer. And that being said, I'd like to hand it back to Reverend David, see if he has any closing thoughts to share and lead us in a prayer to consecrate us on this wonderful Father's Day, but that's also in veneration of the mothers.
Every role and every person needs to be venerated and celebrated. No, I think I just want to say that, one of the models that works for me, one of the understanding that works for me is understanding all these materials as learning a language. And I think that's incredibly important because then it gives you a grasp of what people are doing when they're talking about these things. My friends, we've had the sheer blessing of being able to meet here again today. And some will be joining us later. But for those present, it's always a great joy to speak together again and to chew the cud and to remember our fathers, remember our families, remember our loved ones, remember those that are dear to us. But I sincerely pray that in the days ahead until we meet again, that the language of the angels, that celestial tongue that not only enlivens the heart but expands the life around us, is ever more clear and in our sight, in our minds. That the darkness is ever more dispelled, and that we may approach ever more clearly that brilliance and radiance of light that surrounds Christ as our Lord. Amen.
Amen. And thank you all very much. And Reverend David, thank you so much, my brother. And